expressed on the program may not reflect the opinions of WBTK, its staff, management, or sponsors.
Domestic violence, grief, sexual abuse, homelessness, drug addiction, promiscuity, hope for help, depression, business are just some of the subjects discussed today on Reclaiming My Life with the author of Amazon's #1 best-selling book, Reclaiming My Life. Here's television and radio host Claudia Massey.
Hello, everyone. Look, before we get started today, I want to take the time to wish my mother a happy heavenly birthday. She would have been 75 years old today. I miss her so much. Look, today, y'all, we're going to be talking about mental health. Look, that's something we should talk about every day because, you know, so many of us are going through so many different trials and challenges in our lives, y'all, trauma, and we're trying to reclaim. And a lot of times we can't reclaim because we don't even know what's wrong, you know. And today we're going to be focusing on bipolar. You know, sometimes, you know, we say, you know, hey, he or she, they act bipolar. They might be. It's undiagnosed, right? They don't know that they're bipolar. So, you know, sometimes when you're saying it, it's important to know the signs, the symptoms of these mental illnesses. And today I have with me romance and finance specialist, Mr. Rob Malloy. We're going to talk some things out and do our best to educate you all a little bit. Welcome to the Reclaiming My Life show, Mr. Malloy.
Hey, thank you again. I appreciate the opportunity. Anytime I can make impact. And again, I'm appreciative for your platform.
Yes, look, it is my absolute pleasure to have you here. Mr. Malloy, he was a guest on the television show Reclaiming My Life. And I tell you, when I say he has a lot to unpack, you know, I have to have him several times, okay? Because you're definitely going to have to come back because, y'all, he's also the founder and CEO of Keeping Veterans Fit. So we're definitely going to have you back so we can touch on that as well.
Yeah, for sure. You know, there's so much that's going on, and we all have to realize that at some point we're on one or the other side of that fence. And so when it comes to mental health, when it comes to just different things going on in our lives, we have to give ourselves grace and also remember that, you know, somebody has been on one or other sides in this lifetime.
Yes, amen to that. Amen. Thank you for that. You know, as we get ready to talk about bipolar, if you do not know what bipolar is a chronic mental health condition characterized by intense, alternating mood swings between extreme emotional highs and lows. And today I want this romance and finance specialist, Mr. Malloy, if you would, let's talk about how, you know, in relationships, and I'm focusing more on marriages right now, how bipolar can affect the romance side of a marriage.
Yeah, for sure. You know, first of all, I think we have to keep in mind that, you know, marriage is a covenant. So it's not just a commitment, but it's a covenant between two people and God. And so that commitment is there, but we also have to understand that there's going to be some challenges, you know, within that marriage and that relationship. So when we talk about bipolar, of course, you know, we get accustomed to our mate doing certain things, being a certain way, kind of understanding us and being our partner. And so when there's issues, because it is an issue, it is a disorder, we have to understand that we have to look beyond that individual and understand that something is going on internally and it's beyond them. So we need help. We need that support. We need to know that we're going to get through this together. And it could be as frustrating as it can be. Again, we never know what side we're going to be on. So it's so important to just understand that, hey, this is my mate. This is my partner. I've made a commitment and a covenant with God to be with them through those sicknesses and through health.
Yes. Amen to that. You know, and of course we have our listeners, you know, and some are very frustrated and overwhelmed, you know,
Sure.
because it can become, a burnout for, the partner who isn't bipolar. When you
Hmm.
think about, you have a spouse, say that spouse, number one, is in denial,
Sure.
is refusing therapy and counseling and medication.
Right.
There may have been some infidelity issues. So, what would you say to the spouse, who is burnt out and, said there's no communication, there's no trust, you're dealing with all of that, from your partner. What would you say to the spouse?
Yeah. So I think this is something that taking that instance in consideration is important. But even if that isn't presented in the relationship, I think it's important to realize that professional help is needed because there's different strategies. There's different ways to help with communication, to help with understanding, but you want to be able to have a reference of someone that has experienced this or at least has some knowledge on how to handle this because it could be very foreign. You can go from a very comfortable, happy, blissful marriage, and then an onset like this can just cause some chaos and cause some unfamiliarity in that relationship. So finding a support system, looking at professional help to help you guide and navigate through this is going to be a lot more helpful than just praying because God has placed professionals and those that are familiar and know how to handle these types of situations. And so, as the word says, lead not to your own understanding. So
Yes.
that's true that we can have some help and believe that this will be a successful process and we're going through it together.
Come on, together. Yes, I love that. So, when we're talking about bipolar and finances,
Yeah.
during that mania phase,
Mm.
talk to us.
Yeah. A lot of times I think it's important that we prepare for the future, that we have, meetings of the minds, within that family dynamic. And so that we can have directives on what our finances are going to look like in times of, the ups and downs. Maybe there's been a salary change or maybe, someone has lost some income. And so we need to really start thinking about these things as a standard before we get into a situation to where things may have been turned upside down. So the strategy for me doesn't change. It's having the conversations about how we're going to handle our finances. If we need to get, some type of automation or professional involved so that we know if there is an emergency, if there is a change going on in our life and our lifestyle. And it doesn't always have to be in the negative end. What if we have an increase of income? What if we start a business together? We want to have these type of directives in place already in case there is some type of change in our life or our lifestyle. So it can be challenging, especially if the income has leaned more so on that spouse that is now, dealing with the bipolar disorder, and now they may not be working. And so what are we going to do? How are we going to make sure that our bills are paid? What are we looking at when it comes to that supplemental income? So I think it should be a standard, Ms. Claudia, that we look at our finances in the beginning and we have a strategy and a budget together so that it can be automated, but at the same time, we're on the same page.
Yes, the same page. That's important. I coach a lot of couples, and the thing is, too, you just gave us some good information there. But when a person have a bipolar disorder, and they're in the manic phase,
Yeah.
there are a lot of impulses, to do things, risky behaviors, going out, being promiscuous and unprotected sex and infidelity and the spending sprees. It's like no matter how much you communicate, what we need to do and how we're going to do it, it's like the mental illness actually takes over, and that can become very frustrating, for the spouse, because you have this plan, this incredible plan, and, you both can have, great jobs. But at the end of the day, you may not be seeing what you should be seeing because the mental illness, takes control. So I think the key here, of course, is going back to, if you don't get the help you need, then nothing's going to work. Nothing's going to work. But again, like I said in the beginning, there are so many who are in denial. So, the question is, Mr. Malloy, at what point, because we're talking about, the communication breakdown, the trust issues, the infidelity, the finances, that can become very heavy on that spouse, who is actually trying to, in a sense, be the caregiver. It become very heavy. So at what point, if at any point, do you leave?
Yeah. That's a really tough question, because everyone has their own threshold and bandwidth. And, so when I think about that, because I've been asked that question a lot in different scenarios, when do I actually leave? And, it's going to be case by case, but I really think that most importantly, understand that, you guys are together, you guys have made that commitment, but you don't want to do anything detrimental to your life. Anytime that you feel like your life is in jeopardy, anytime you feel like your life is threatening, then you have to make some really tough decisions, and you have to stick with those decisions. But one thing that I would recommend, or one of the things I would recommend, is to make sure that you have your tribe in with you. Make sure that you're considering, your tribe, meaning, others that not necessarily know your business, but, actually someone that you can talk to when it comes to emergencies, and whether that's your parents or your best friend, or whether, you do have some type of therapist or some type of counselor, because you don't want to go through these things alone, and you don't want to make impulsive decisions. And, when it comes down to it, it's going to be your health, your mental health, your physical health, obviously your financial health, because you don't want to be out on the streets, not knowing what's going on. And all of a sudden, things have changed with your housing situation. So, your prayer life is going to be extremely important. Being able to meditate and make sure you have that self-care so you can be aware of what's going on around you. And it's so tough because, depending on what side you're on, you would want somebody to fight for you. You would want somebody to understand that this is beyond me. This is a mental condition. So the person that you met and may have fell in love with and have built this life and lifestyle with, it's more of an illness. And so it's like, you want that person to get help as well, but you never want to jeopardize, your life, and never want to put yourself in danger, because you can't help anybody if you're not in position yourself.
Absolutely. If you would, Mr. Malloy, before we close out, some may be saying, yes, I fell in love with this person. I didn't notice the signs. Are there any signs or symptoms that you can share with us that people can look out for?
Yeah, so when it comes down to any type of mental health conditions, it can be a chronic, onset, or it could be something that may comes as sporadic. And so, I think it's really important when you're in a relationship, when you're getting to know someone, that you get some history about what goes on with them and what may go on with their family. And I don't think that should be offensive, because if you're going to spend the rest of your life with someone, and you're going to commit your life and your resources and your time and all those things, you should know what you're getting into. And I would rather have these uncomfortable conversations in the beginning of the relationship, in the beginning of the knowing stage, so you can have as much as possible to make an educated decision, because it may be something as simple as, hey, have you ever had any type of mental issues like in your family? Because it's important so we know how to support that. So it doesn't have to come off offensive as if, is you crazy? Is you on pills? You on the medical? doctors' medical provision. But if you come in a sense of love and compassion and empathy on how can I better support you, I think that'll make a big difference than interrogating or having a person feeling like they're being interrogated.
Yes, absolutely. And I want to add to that, a few signs that you all can look for with bipolar disorder. Attention seeking, when a grown person is doing a lot of attention
Absolutely.
seeking, whether it's, in a social crowd or on social media, when you
Right.
see them posting a lot, or, if they're commenting, they got to put 50, look, like the old people say, 50, 11 emojis behind it, right? That's attention
Right.
seeking.
Right there.
If you see them being disrespectful, and of course that doesn't mean that, have a bipolar disorder when we're talking about being disrespectful, but, just consistently being disrespectful,
Yeah.
and they're married, that's attention seeking. If you
Yeah.
see a lot of mirroring or mimicking someone else, that's another sign. If you see a strain on relationships with their children, with their family, they
Mm.
don't have any healthy relationships, and you're wondering, hey, what's going on? And you hear them always saying, hey, it's my children. Hey, it's my family. It's my in-laws. It's my this.
Yeah.
It's my coworkers. Trust me, it's not everybody. It's them.
Accountability.
Yes, accountability. Come on,
Right.
So these are some, signs and symptoms of bipolar disorder. If you see those mood swings, and also if you find yourself having to walk on eggshells, they're really sensitive,
Sure.
that's a problem. Do you want to live the rest of your life like this? When you start seeing these things, don't accept it. Like Mr. Malloy say, ask questions, but hey, it's all about the presentation. And then you have to ask yourself, is this what I want for the rest of my life? So Mr. Malloy, do you have any final words for us today for our listeners that you can leave with us on mental illness?
Yeah. So when it comes to mental illness, before we think about the illnesses, we have to think about the mental health. And so, just like the physical aspect of things, it's important to do things that help your mental health. I say pray and meditate, but I also say do things that make you happy. Focus on the things that you enjoy. Continue to grow and develop personally first, because if you can't be the best version of yourself, you can't be a good version and a healthy partner to your significant other. And so you should always consider, self improvement, self love, and it'll help you identify some things going on in your relationship. So I would say identity is so important. Never forget your identity. But again, when we talk about mental illness, don't be afraid to say something. Don't be afraid to address. Don't think that things will go away. Don't wait 6 months, because 6 months will turn into 6 years. And the next thing you know, you're looking back and you're trying to figure out, why haven't you made any adjustments in your life? So don't be afraid to take action, and it can happen to anyone. So do not feel like you're start out just to go through these certain things, because some things happen in life, and then some things we allow to happen in life. So take charge and
Yes.
reclaim your life.
Come on, you ended it right there. Yes, take charge and reclaim your life. And let me tell y'all, it's possible. First key, look, get help. Get
That's right.
help. And then once you get that help, I do believe that you can reclaim your life. Thank you so much, Mr. Malloy, for taking the time to stop by Reclaiming My Life today. I truly appreciate you, your insight, your education, and I'm going to definitely have to have you back, because, we got some more to talk about. So thank you again.
My pleasure. I appreciate that. And you can find me on all social media platforms. I am Rob Malloy, and I look forward to making impact with you more and more. And I appreciate you again, Ms. Massey. God bless you.
Yes, you're so welcome, and God bless you as well. Again, y'all can find him on all social media platforms. I am Rob Malloy, Malloy, Malloy. Thank
That's
you
right.
again. Thank you,
Yes,
thank
ma'am.
you, thank you. Look, y'all have a wonderful, wonderful, blessed day. Remember, y'all, celebrate with me today, remembering the life and legacy of my mother, Rena Mae Burney. She would have been 75 years old today. Look, until next time, don't y'all stay encouraged and remember, you can reclaim your life. Be blessed.
You have just heard Reclaiming My Life with life coach and author Claudia Massey. To get your copy of Amazon's #1 best-selling book, Reclaiming My Life, visit www.contactclaudiamassey.com and tune in each Monday at 12 noon for Reclaiming My Life with television and radio host Claudia Massey on WBTK 1380.